Have you ever wondered how to incorporate jazz chords in your playing in a way that feels intuitive, creative, and helps you develop a unique sound? Well, we're gonna look at how to take regular open chords like this and then turn them into something like this. Although maybe you don't play jazz standards like that, but still want to know how to add these types of chords to your playing, we're going to look at how to do that too. But first, what do you think a jazz chord exactly is? Well, it isn't really a thing. There's just certain types of chords that you commonly hear in that style, and those are typically with a lot of notes, usually 7th chords, 9th chords, and so on. But to understand the power of these chords, I need to show you why you must first look at playing these in an open position. I first started out learning my 7th chords like this, so taking chords that I already knew, these open minor and major chords, and then adding 7ths to them. So taking this, minor chord and then making it an A minor 7th. So it makes it a little, jazzier, taking a C major, making it a C major 7, and an E, and making it an E7, an E dominant 7, and things like that. It's a great way to build off open major and minor chords if you already know those, because we're often just changing, one note like this to this. But eventually I realized playing these chords in the open position was limiting. So we're going to check out how to play these chords in another style, but let's listen to how I started to solve the open chord problem. Now there's something that if you don't do, all of this won't necessarily work that well. But before we get to that, here are some of the basics. So getting out of this open position and playing them in a closed way so that there's no open strings really helps with the rhythm, first of all, because you can just let that come up, slide into it, things like that, where you're kind of stuck with this open sound. So in jazz, you don't hear chords played down here quite as much. So you want to get out of that place and start playing these chords around here, and that's gonna open things up right away. And the other thing is you want to be aware of the voicing, the particular way that you're playing the chord, and it literally just means how each note is played. It comes from old classical choral stuff where it'd be how someone voiced a particular chord. So it'd be you sing this note, you sing that note, you sing that, or let's mix it up, you sing that note, and you change the voicing. So think of that as these notes as little people singing, little voices. So playing like, say, this C major, and then playing it this way is a different voicing because the notes are arranged in a different way. Let's add a little more color with adding ninths, but make sure you also listen for something else I'm going to do with these chords. See, I went to school for jazz, and about a week or so in, during a big band rehearsal, the conductor, he stopped and he told me, that I was a little too bassy and it was conflicting with the sound. And there's no, kind of jazz situation you're going to conflict more than in a big band where there's all these horns and piano. You're just a small puzzle piece in this big puzzle. And I thought, okay, so I'll turn down the bass on the amp, on my guitar, like he asked me to do. Tried it. He still thought it was a little bit, much. So I tried a little more. He was like, okay, that's okay. Then I went home and I thought, when I was practicing, I don't think it was so much the tone that he was bothered by, but it was the way I was voicing the chords. And I realized that you don't have to play the whole chord, because I got so into learning these chords, I thought I'd just play all the notes and I'd play, you know, that root in the bottom. And I realized you don't have to play the root in the bottom, and you don't even need to play these two strings, the low E and the A, at all, because they're very thick and they were conflicting with the situations I was in. So I just started playing just the top 4 strings. So just playing like this, you know, that kind of way. Went in the next day, was playing that way, didn't touch these 2 strings at all, and he was big thumbs up, like that sounded way better. And even though I actually went back to my original tone settings, so it was the way I was playing it. So you gotta really keep in mind here that this stuff can conflict whether you're in a jazz setting or in a non-jazz setting. These chords, they get very thick, and you gotta be careful about how you use them. And I actually left the organ on the backing track I'm playing with here on purpose, because it causes a little bit of tension. It really, in that early part of just playing the open chords, you know, with the low bass there, it really kind of conflicted. But as we go through this, you'll see how I'm gonna find a way to piece it together a little easier. So speaking of ninths, what I'm doing here is adding a ninth on top. And I'm not gonna dive deep into the theory, but just mention that a ninth is the same thing as the second. So if you're talking about, you know, A minor, the second in relation to A minor, or just A, is B, right? So A, B, C, right? But we don't want to play it down here. You just throw it on top. So if you take the same chord, like an A minor 7, you throw a B on top. This is just replacing another A. That is what they call is a minor ninth chord. So that's just a quick crash course, and we can do that with other chords as well. And you know, I used to just throw these chords that I learned together without thinking about how they were connected to one another. But then I started to make sure to focus on the notes in each chord and where they were going next. It's something called voice leading. So just because you know how to play a fancy chord doesn't mean, like I said, you have to play all of it. It's more important to look at the big picture of how they relate. And I usually tend to focus on the top note the most, because that kind of creates a melody with the chords. You know, you can go like, you'd have, and if you're playing the whole thing, you can hear a little more context. So it's not enough to just think about the voicing individually, but think about how they go from one note to the next, so that voice leading. Now, what if you're not actually playing jazz, but you want to use these kinds of chords? Well, if you're playing something like G minor to C, you can add spice to them like this. So all I was doing was making it a G minor 7th, right? I wasn't playing the whole chord, and then I made it a C7 like this, and then moved it up here to play a G minor 9 to a C7. You know, and that really, I think it worked in that situation. It doesn't always work though, but the thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to always just play the chord the way it is. So when you see a minor chord, just try a minor 7th or a minor 9th and see if, you know, you like it. So you might be wondering, where can I get a list of some of these jazz chords? Well, I put together a PDF with all the ones we looked at here, plus a handful of others, because you can get overwhelmed looking at endless ways to play these chords. But these are a great starting point. So you can find the link for the free PDF in the description down below, or just scan this QR code over here. You know, I mentioned that it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of learning endless chords. If you want to explore a few more voicings and hear how they sound in a different context than jazz, check out this video here, because in it, I demonstrate how you can use these voicings for funk along with some other voicings as well.